and let Abby take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here today and sort of enlighten you all about Saltwatch, especially if you haven't heard of the Saltwatch program before. So again, my name is Abby Hileman, and I'm the Saltwatch coordinator at the Izaak Walton League of America. For those of you who are maybe not familiar with the Izaak Walton League, we're actually one of the oldest conservation organizations in the United States. We are 101 years old this year, and we have been involved in clean water programs across the country through our Save Our Streams program since 1969, and that's a benthic monitoring program. So I'm going to go into some detail about how the Saltwatch program began, a history of road salt pollution, some information about the results that we've received as part of our program, and then how you can get involved in the program and sort of steps after maybe you've taken some samples within your community. So in 2017, there was this really big road salt spill that you can see here on the photo right outside of our national office headquarters in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And this salt spill was on top of a storm drain that led directly to a local waterway running right below this road called the Muddy Branch, which leads into the Potomac River, which is a drinking water source for millions of people in southern Maryland. And so at this time, our Clean Water Fellow, who was sort of the head person taking charge of what was happening with this salt spill, he was trying to figure out who had jurisdiction over this salt spill. Was it the state? Was it the county? Was it the city? Was it a private applicator? And who was responsible for cleaning up this salt spill? He made a lot of different calls over the period of a day, trying to figure out who can come and clean this up, because this not only was a hazard for people walking or driving, but it was also a hazard for our local wildlife, especially the organisms that live in the waterway below. Finally, someone came by and cleaned up the salt spill, but unfortunately, the damage to the waterway below was already done. The chloride levels in the waterway spiked to really toxic levels overnight since the salt spill occurred. And so, inspired by the success of our Save Our Streams program, or SOS, which again is that benthic monitoring program, we launched the Saltwatch program in 2018. The goals of our program are to raise awareness in the general public about the connection between salt and stream health, and then also salt and public health, to identify chloride hotspots in freshwater, and to advocate for smarter salt application of road salt by sharing results that we receive through our program with private landowners and local and state agencies. And I will be using the words salt and chloride interchangeably throughout this talk. And if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put those in the chat. I'll try to answer them throughout, but definitely I'll leave some time at the end to answer those questions. There's a number of different types of road salt that we commonly use throughout the winter. Sodium chloride, which is really the same thing as table salt, except there's some additional additives to prevent clumping for road salt. Sodium chloride is the most common and also the least costly, the least expensive of the road salts used. So one of the reasons it's the most commonly used road salt. We also use potassium chloride as well as magnesium chloride and calcium chloride. And the magnesium and calcium chloride, they're typically used at lower temperatures than the sodium chloride is, because the calcium and magnesium chloride, they sort of lower that freezing point of water at even lower temperatures than sodium chloride can. Sodium chloride, by the way, works to about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And magnesium and calcium chloride work at a little bit lower temperatures. It's also really important for us to understand really sort of the background of road salt. It has been applied in this country for so many years, since honestly about the 1940s. It was first sort of experimented in some areas of the country, and then it was really applied quite a bit starting especially in the 1970s. A lot of times we're used to seeing road salt application sort of on the left picture here with the big salt truck spreading all of these granules of road salt throughout the streets and sidewalks and parking lots around the country. And it is still a very common application today, but a lot of times we're also seeing sort of these lines that are being sprayed on the roadways. That's still a salt application. It's a brine, and so it's a salt water mixture. So there's a lot less salt that's actually being applied in this brine mixture, and it sticks on the roadways a lot better than that granular application does. The granules tend to bounce off of the roadways as people are walking or driving, and that granule, it's really concentrated salt, whereas the sprayed, that brine solution, is again a lot less concentrated. And the brine application, those lines that are being sprayed on the roadways, they work really well because they're creating a layer, sort of a barrier layer between the surface of that pavement and any precipitation that is coming down. And so that helps applicators to sort of be able to remove any snow or ice that accumulates much easier than if there was nothing there whatsoever. So that's one way that a lot of departments of transportation and private applicators throughout the country are actually reducing their road salt application or road salt use throughout the country. Just to give you a sense of how much road salt is being applied around the country, every year we apply about 20 million tons, depending on the winter weather, again, across the United States. So a lot of road salt is being applied throughout the country. And a lot of times we're used to seeing road salt application like this photo here on the left, just a lot of salt. There's some common misconceptions that you should feel the crunch underfoot, that more salt equals more melting. Both of those are false. Salt actually works best if it's spread out. So if you're applying granular salt, a salt chunk sort of every 3 inches is what is sort of a desired amount. Again, you shouldn't feel that crunch underfoot. And actually, and I'll have a visual at the end of my presentation today, but a 12-ounce mug, your typical coffee mug, actually holds enough salt to salt a 20-foot-long driveway or 10 sidewalk squares, which is about 2 parking spaces. So as far as salt application, a little bit of salt goes a really long way. A big kicker that we have in this country is a lot of folks are really worried about liability. They're worried about being sued for slip and falls throughout the country. And so they tend to apply more road salt just to sort of cover themselves. And another awful part about this is that a lot of private for-hire salt applicators, like folks who are applying salt to maybe commercial business parking lots or sometimes library parking lots, things like that, they're often contracted by the number of pounds of salt or number of bags of salt applied any season. And so this really leads to a lot of gross oversalting practices. There are a number of wildlife impacts. Road salt and chloride does affect fish, but some smaller organisms like macroinvertebrates and plankton, they might even be more sensitive than fish. There's been a lot of community studies or like food web studies essentially to learn a little bit more about how salt affects different ecosystems. And in a lot of cases, they've started to learn that little things like Daphnia, also known as water fleas, those are organisms that are really responsible for consuming algae and preventing eutrophication events or algae blooms and then subsequent die-offs. Those organisms tend to be highly affected by even low concentrations of chloride that are making their way into the environment. And so sometimes if those Daphnia are removed, one food source is then removed from the environment for larger organisms, but then also we might have sort of other events that are happening like algal blooms as a result. Things like vernal pools, which are usually sort of depressions, maybe within a forest or other area that become water bodies as a result of seasonal snow melt. They can also be very intensely affected because they don't have a discharge or drainage point. And so if there's any chloride that enters those waterways, it tends to build up and build up over time. And a lot of really sensitive organisms like amphibians are the ones that breed in those pools. And so it can affect them as well. And then, of course, mammals like us can be affected from drinking high chlorinated streams or water with high chloride in it. As well as things like deer and moose. They can use sometimes roads as salt licks, which can put them into direct conflict with vehicles on roadways. There are a number of drinking water impacts. Chloride is different than chlorine. It is sort of chlorine as an element, but it's an anion. It's a negatively charged ion of chlorine, and it's not something that disinfects water. Chlorine eventually will turn into chloride since it's the stable form of chlorine, but those two things are very different, even though they might seem very similar. Chloride is not removed at water filtration plants or wastewater treatment facilities. Most of the water filtration plants across the country, they do not have the infrastructure or the funding to feasibly remove chloride from the water. It's not something that you can just filter out of your waterway. It needs to go through a very specific process like desalinization or reverse osmosis to actually be able to be removed. And so that can be a really big issue. Water itself is very, very corrosive. Chloride, as you'll learn in the next slide, is also very corrosive. And so if you are having these streams or source waters become very highly chlorinated with chloride, then you can have even more corrosion. And this was a really big issue that we found out in 2014. Many of you might be familiar with the Flint water crisis that occurred in Flint, Michigan. This has actually been directly related to road salt pollution. There was a number of things that went wrong in this whole situation, but basically, to simplify what happened, they switched their source water directly to the Flint River, and it was April of that year. And so the chlorides within that waterway were very high from the previous winter of road salting. And they didn't put any anti-corrosives into the water that they are then pumping out into the public's drinking water supply. And they had very old infrastructure, lead and copper pipes. And so they didn't take into account how much more corrosive that water was that they were giving to residents. And so it actually corroded out their pipes, and lead and copper ended up in people's drinking water, which is a very unfortunate situation. And so, as I mentioned, chloride is incredibly corrosive, and there's a lot of different infrastructure impacts that occur as a result of it. This past winter, there was actually a Honda CR-V recall that was directly related to a part that was being corroded by road salt. So pretty incredible. The estimate that I have here that it costs the US between $16 to $19 billion annually in damages, that's actually sort of the low end of the estimate. Again, every year we use about 20 million tons of road salt. There's been a number of different estimates trying to figure out how much damage road salt actually causes after it's been applied. And it's been thought to cause somewhere between $800 to $3,300 per ton of road salt that's applied. So if you do the math, 800 to 330 or 3,300 dollars worth of road salt damage per ton, and we're using 20 million tons of road salt. You can do the math on that. It's really incredible. And road salt is very persistent once it enters the environment. There's really no feasible way to actually remove it once it does enter the environment. And so 1 teaspoon of road salt can actually permanently pollute 5 gallons of water. And so if you're going to the store picking up a 50-pound bag of road salt, which is how it's normally sold, that can actually pollute 10,000 gallons of water, which is about the size of an average residential pool, which is pretty incredible. I did want to go through some of our data. So this is sort of on the national scale. SaltWatch is a nationwide community science monitoring effort, monitoring road salt pollution or chloride, and trying to advocate for smarter salting practices. The image that you see here on the right, there's a number of dots. The larger the dot, the more data submissions that we've had for that area. And then the color of those dots corresponds with the chloride concentration the average concentration that we're seeing in those areas. So since the beginning of the program in 2018, we've received over 15,000 data points or submissions to the program. To give you an idea of what these numbers mean that are here on our graph, 30 parts per million is really the lowest that our test strips read. So anything below 30 parts per million, we consider to be an excellent sample. It's within naturally occurring limits of chloride throughout the country. 100 parts per million is sort of the cutoff for what is considered to be naturally occurring for chloride around the United States. In many regions of the country, that number is actually significantly lower than 100 parts per million. But for our purposes, for this graph, 100 parts per million and below is what's naturally occurring. And so anything between 30 parts per million and 100 parts per million, this is all in milligrams per liter, is considered to be good. Anything above 100 parts per million is not considered to be naturally occurring, and anything over 230 parts per million is considered to be chronically toxic to freshwater aquatic life. And so that's what some of those numbers mean. If you're looking carefully at the map that we have here on the right, you'll notice that in a lot of the regions that especially have sort of those poor or toxic readings as an average, those are areas that have large amounts of impervious surfaces. So things like sidewalks and concrete, things that will not allow that chloride to sort of absorb into the soil. And so lots of, and also places where that are northern climates. And so road salt is heavily applied in those areas as well. So highly concentrated areas of chloride in those regions. Just to give you some example of Ohio data, since the beginning of the program in Ohio, we've had 273 data points. Ohio within the last couple of years has really only just started the Salt Watch program. And so just to show you what we've had for the last couple of years, so 32% of the samples we've received have been excellent, 34% have been good, 19 poor, and 15% have been toxic throughout the sort of greater Ohio region. Last season for Salt Watch, we received 121 data points, 7% excellent, 40% good, 29% poor, and 24% toxic. And then not too many submissions so far this season. Our season started in July, so 7 data points, mostly around the Cleveland area. So we're hoping for a really big season for Ohio. And this wouldn't be possible without our Salt Watch partners. So as of today, we have 47 official Salt Watch partners across the United States that are helping out with this program. And as you see here, flow is right there. So thank you so much. And if anyone from Franklin Soil and Water Conservation District is on here as well, your logo's on there too. So as part of our program, we've been trying to help folks learn about what's happening really in their own backyard. And as such, we are able to give out free chloride testing kits to anyone interested in becoming a Salt Watch monitor. And we mail these kits out in a standard business envelope. And each kit includes 4 chloride testing strips, instructions for how to take a sample, and instructions for uploading that data. And we'll go over that here in a moment. And some questions that we receive is, when should we monitor? So ideally, it would be consistently throughout the year, such as like the first Saturday of every month. But we realize that not everybody has the availability to do something like that. So if you're not able to monitor throughout the year, we do ask if it's possible for you to monitor during the winter. That's sort of the most ideal time to monitor, although we do realize that it's really important to learn about what's happening within our backyards, what chloride's doing in our backyards throughout the year as well. So if you're only able to monitor with us during the winter time, or maybe you're consistently monitoring throughout the year and you would like to monitor additionally during the winter time to see some of these chloride spikes, before winter weather to get that baseline reading is really important. After the first winter storm, when road salt has been applied to the roads, whenever it's safe to go out and monitor after those events have occurred, after the first thaw or rainstorm of the winter, and then after the next rain event. And so going through really to take your sample, again, when you receive your test kit, you're going to get 4 chloride test strips and instructions for taking the sample and submitting the data to us. Additionally, when you go out in the field, you'll need a small jar or cup, ideally glass or plastics, and sometimes the paper cups tend to kind of slough off a little bit. So taking out your cup and taking out 1 test strip with you to the field, you're going to want to take that cup and add water to it, empty that water out, add water to it, empty it out, add water to it, empty it out, and then add about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of water at the bottom of the cup. The reason why we do this is to make sure, especially if you're testing multiple places, that cup is sort of rinsed out completely and doesn't have any residual chloride from maybe some other testing sites. So you have a pure sample when you're ready to test. You put that Quantab strip in, the chloride strip that you receive with your test kit, with the word Quantab sticking up at the top. Try to not get the top wet, and then you wait about 3 minutes. And what you're waiting to see is to see at the very top of your test strip, it originally looks like that Quantab strip on the right, where there's sort of an orange horizontal line at the top. You're waiting until that turns kind of that bluish black color, and it should be completely black all the way across that horizontal line. And you also will likely see some sort of peak at the bottom, and that's what you're going to read and then convert that into chloride. So what this strip is reading is considered Quantab units. And what you're going to do is try to figure out where the top of that peak falls. If it's between 2 lines, go with the lower line so we don't sort of say that there's a higher concentration in a region than maybe there actually is. And so for this example, that peak falls pretty much exactly at 4. It might even go over 4 just a tiny bit. So we're going to say that this Quantab strip reads 4 Quantab units. Well, what does that mean? Looking at our chart then, you go down Quantab units, you find where that 4 is, and you go across and you find out that it is 157 parts per million chloride, or milligrams per liter. So those are 2 really important numbers for this test strip. Quantab units are 4, and then 157 is parts per million chloride. And that'll be really important later for when we go and learn about how to submit your data. And so when you are ready to submit that data, you have that test strip reading, you're ready to submit, you'll look at the postcard that you receive with your kit that looks like this. You will go to www.cleanwaterhub.org/saltwatch to create an account in the Clean Water Hub, which is our data submission platform, and to be able to submit your data. And so some background on the Clean Water Hub, which again is our data submission platform. It's owned by the Izaak Walton League of America. It is a national water quality database created with accessibility and usability in mind. It's meant to really be easy to share data, understand that data, and access that data. And there are a couple of different color-coded interactive maps. We have a community map, which you see here on the bottom right. We have a Salt Watch map, and then also a Nitrate Watch map. And Nitrate Watch is a newer program that we have started in February of this year. And the Clean Water Hub, it doesn't just compile data for Salt Watch, but it compiles data from some of our other programs as well, such as Save Our Streams Chemical, which incorporates data from dissolved oxygen, phosphate, nitrate, temperature, pH, chloride, and transparency. Save Our Streams Biological, which is a benthic monitoring program looking at different macroinvertebrates in the area. VASOS, Virginia Save Our Streams, which is a really rigorous benthic monitoring program that is sort of in the Chesapeake Bay region and more specifically in Virginia. Creek Critters, which I can send all of you information about. It's a really awesome introduction to benthic monitoring. It's actually an app that you can use on your phone, a free app that was created by us and also formerly Audubon Naturalist Society, now known as Nature Forward. Really fun app to use with kids and different adult programs. Salt Watch, and then also Nitrate Watch data. As of October 31st, there have been over 15,000 sample site locations or stations, over 54,000 samples that have been submitted to the Clean Water Hub, 207 organizations, and over 1,300 members use the Clean Water Hub across the country. And if you do have any questions when using the Clean Water Hub, we do have a help tab. It's at the upper right-hand corner of the page. There are some user guides and frequently asked questions and some fact sheets as well. But please feel free to email me if you have any questions about using the hub, and I'll have my contact information at the end of this presentation. So how do you submit data? You go to www.cleanwaterhub.org/saltwatch. It will bring you to a page that looks like this. Put in your email address, first name, last name. It's free to sign up. I do have an organization page for Flow, and so you can type in either Flow or Friends of the Lower Olentangy, and your organization will come up. That'll associate you with the organization, and then you can submit data through the organization or associate further future sites with that organization. So once you create your account or log in if you already have an account, it will take you to a page that looks like this. And all you have to do is click Create a Saltwatch Reading. And first, it will ask you if you've created a site location before. So if you have, you can select a sample site location that you've created previously, or you can click Create a New Site. For this presentation, we're going to go ahead and click Create a New Site, and it will bring up a form that looks like this. And what you're going to submit first is information about that sample site location that you're actually doing the sample at. And so creating a site name, please don't just write like Abby Stream. Please be a little bit more specific than that. For instance, like the Susquehanna River at such and such roadway. Whatever best describes that stream, but maybe will not be confused with somebody else's site that they're submitting within the Clean Water Hub. If there is a name of that water source, so maybe for my example, the Susquehanna River would be the name of that water source, and then what type of water source, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And then if you want to describe your sample site location at all, like it's 50 feet from such and such bridge down this path, as much information and as detailed as possible as you can make it, that would be awesome. And then if you'd like to associate that sample site with Flow, you can go ahead and write that organization in here. As long as you've previously associated yourself with the organization, then that organization will show up. If you're working with or volunteering with a number of different organizations, you can associate yourself when you're signing up with all of those organizations, as long as they already have a page in the Clean Water Hub. And then you can also add a photo of your site. So to go over what different types of water sources you can select, are you sampling from a private groundwater well, a public drinking water system, small stream or creek, a river, a lake, a pond or wetland, a drainage outlet pipe, or other? If it's other, just write that in the site description of what type of site you're sampling from. And then you're going to input some data of where that sample site is. So right in the city, the state. If you know the latitude, longitude, awesome. I don't. I don't usually pay attention to what my lat longs are. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to either write an address in the search bar and then turn location mode on, or you can scroll into your site, use these plus or minus buttons on the right to zoom in on where your site is. And then if you click add location mode on, it will give you a pin that you can place on exactly where that sample site location is. And if that's the only site that you are sampling at, you don't need to fill out any of that information again. If you're sampling at multiple sites, you'll have to fill out this form for each of those sites. But then once you do that, you don't have to submit that information again because it'll already be in the Clean Water Hub. So after that information is submitted, Then scrolling down further on that form, you'll input some information about your salt watch reading specifically. So what date did you do that sample? And what was the most recent precipitation? And I'll show you what that looks like. It's not what type of precipitation, but when did the precipitation in your area happen last? What is that quantab unit reading? What was that chloride reading in milligrams per liter? And then also the expiration date and the lot number. Each kit that we're sending out to you, they do have expiration dates, they do expire, and you should not use them after they have expired, because it might not give you as accurate as readings. So the expiration date and lot number are found in the middle of those conversion charts that are sent with your kits. So make sure that whenever you do receive a salt watch kit that you are using the conversion chart that came with those strips. And then if you have any comments about your site, you can write those, or about your sample, you can write those in the comments and then click Save Changes after you have submitted or to submit your data. So the most recent precipitation, less than 12 hours ago, 12 to 48 hours ago, 2 to 7 days ago, 1 to 2 weeks ago, or more than 2 weeks ago. So that's, again, the most recent precipitation surrounding your sampling date. And then again, that quantab reading for the example that we used prior, that test strip that we had, it was 4 quantab units. So you can input 4 into the quantab unit reading, and then 4 quantab units translated to 157 parts per million or milligrams per liter chlorides. That's what you're going to input into that box. And then just giving this picture zoomed in a little bit more for you, expiration date and lot number I found in the center of that conversion chart. If you're using bottles of the quantab strips, which we sometimes send to folks or you can get online, the conversion chart is similar, and that expiration date and lot number are in there in the center, exactly where you're seeing it here in this image. If you're using something else to monitor for chloride, you don't have to put in expiration date and lot number if you're not using the chloride strips. And again, save changes to submit your reading. You can also submit via an organization. So if you go to Explore Data, which is at the top here, it'll bring up at the bottom something that says All Sites, where you can search for sites or organizations. And so if you click on organizations, then at the bottom, you can search for different organizations that exist within the Clean Water Hub. So for this example, I'm going to search for an organization in Virginia, which is Loudon Wildlife Conservancy. They have a lot of sites on their page. If you haven't previously joined an organization that's near you that has a page in the Clean Water Hub, by searching like this, you can actually click to join that organization. It'll have some information about the organization, maybe a website to access even more information. And then if that organization allows you to download sites and readings, you can actually go ahead and click download sites and readings, and it will give you all of the data from that organization or that people have submitted to that organization on the Clean Water Hub. It will download it as an Excel spreadsheet. It'll give you all the site information and all of the readings that have been submitted there. You can also look at individual sites. So for this example, I'm going to click on Broad Run Heartland. And you can look at the readings that have been submitted on that particular sample site location, or you can go ahead and create a new salt watch reading from there. And then from that, all of the data, that site information data has already been submitted previously. And so all you have to do is submit your chloride reading itself. Since the beginning of the program, there's been a lot of awareness raised around road salt pollution. And these are just a couple different articles from this past winter of different organizations and different cities that are trying to cut back on their road salt pollution. And so we're really looking forward to seeing even more awareness being created this coming winter and more folks cutting back. The purpose of our program is not to eliminate road salt completely, because we realize that we still still need road salt to stay safe in the winter because there really aren't any great alternatives. There are some alternatives out there, but they are very expensive compared to things like sodium chloride, which we typically use. And so we're all about smarter salting and being more mindful about the amount of salt that we are applying on roadways throughout the year. On our website as well, saltwatch.org, we have a number of advocacy resources. Maybe you've submitted a couple of samples to the Clean Water Hub, or maybe you got a really high chloride reading. What do you do then? We have a number of template letters to the editor, letters to local government as well. There's a number of flyers and best practices that you can share and with your community and also learn more. And then we have also created a Salt Watch campaign in your community, an advocacy guide to really learning more about what's happening in your community, but also resources to reach out to some of those applicators. And so inside of the guide, there's template letters to departments of transportation for hired road salt applicators. There's also templates for people who hire those for hire road salt applicators like HOAs and condo associations or building managers, and then also just individual homeowners as well. And there's a background of each of those applicator groups or people who hire those applicators, and some questions that you can ask them, and then also ways to sort of start that conversation in a positive way. Because at the end of the day, everyone's just trying to do their best, and it's not very helpful to really point fingers at different folks, even maybe if they are the cause of a lot of road salt pollution within a community. At the end of the day, they're just trying to do their job and keep people safe. And so starting those conversations, especially on a positive note, is really effective to not only starting the conversation, like I said, but making a change at the community level. This past winter, there were 4 states, 3 of which we have had road salt or Salt Watch volunteers in that have really made a lot of noise to try to get legislation at the state level. So those 4 states were Vermont, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Maryland. Unfortunately, none of the road salt reduction bills went through to pass into law, but it was a very good step in the right direction to reducing road salt pollution throughout the country. And just as sort of a fun, almost last slide, I have 2 more slides after this. This past winter, a really fun event that we did that you could do in your community that you could replicate is a Paint the Plow event. And so here's just a couple photos from some of the plows that we had. What we did was we partnered with our local county Department of Transportation, and they supplied 11 snow plows to give to different school groups and partner organizations and scout troops throughout our county to paint with smart salt messaging. And so it made a lot of really fun connections with the students and the importance of safety during the winter time, but also all of the snow plows that they supplied were within like a close depot to those different organizations. So we're hoping that if those snowplows are out during the winter this year, then some people will be able to see some of those smart salt messaging messages on the snowplows and maybe make a little bit of a difference within their own community. So a really fun idea that is certainly something that can be replicated in different communities across the country. And just to leave you with this sort of idea of a really easy thing that makes a really big difference at your own house. If we do get some winter weather this year, I know last year we didn't get very much, but shoveling early and often to clear those walkways before snow turns to ice, really, really big thing. You don't have to apply as much salt if you're clearing those walkways. Scattering salt. So again, that 12-ounce mug or coffee mug holds enough salt to salt a 20-foot long driveway or 10 sidewalk squares, about 2 parking spaces. And something a lot of folks don't know is that you can actually sweep up any excess salt. So maybe you poured a little bit too much salt out, or maybe a storm event has passed and everything's sort of dried up. You can sweep up that excess salt, store it in a closed container, and reuse it during the next storm event. So another way to sort of reduce the amount of road salt that's going out into the environment while still being safe. And please just salt responsibly this winter and have those conversations with your neighbors and maybe some different applicator groups, because a little bit really does go a long way. And the solution to road salt pollution is each and every one of us being more mindful about our salting practices, thinking about sort of when you're driving places during the winter, waiting until maybe those roadways are clear before heading out during a winter storm. All of those things really do add up to make a really big difference. So if you have any additional questions, please visit saltwatch.org or email me at saltwatch@iwla.org. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
Laura, do you have a question? I see your hand raised. If you want to.
She was clapping.
Oh, clapping. Nice.
I did a little bit of sampling last year, but we had so little snow, and the one time we did, I didn't have time, so I missed the after the storm, basically. Is it still worth entering the data from last year, which I kept? With the date from
Absolutely.
last year? Okay.
Yeah. If you have that data, absolutely enter that data. The more information that we have within our own backyards, the more that we can sort of share that information and learn as a community for what's happening within our different communities across the country. Question in the chat: if test strips come in a pack of 4, can we just ask for more after the 4 are used up? Certainly. You can email me at saltwatch@iwla.org to request more kits. Or maybe you're sampling multiple locations and you know that from the get-go you're going to need more than one kit at a time. Email me, let me know, and I'm more than happy to send you a couple kits at a time. Also, if you don't want to email me, that's fine. You can also go to saltwatch.org and sign up for or complete the Saltwatch pledge, and then you'll enter your address and everything in there, and I'll just mail you a new test kit too. So 2 different ways to get those kits. Either go to saltwatch.org or email me, and I'm more than happy to send those your way. And yes, picking those sites are up to you. I don't know if Jenna has any specific sample sites in mind for folks to sample this coming winter or not. But yes, as far as Saltwatch is concerned, especially if you have a stream that you know of already, you're more than welcome to sample that site. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can expand on that a little bit. We have not had too much information about what sites exactly to sample. I've just been sampling in the Olentangy River, and we had a few people last year sampling in the tributaries. So I think if you've been involved with stream quality monitoring and you're familiar with a site already, those would be really great ones to continue monitoring, because we have some other data from them. But really, we're just trying to expand and get more data around Columbus. So if there's a stream near your house or an area of concern or something of interest, you could feel free to sample there too.
Yeah, and there have been a number, especially within schools, that have been involved in Saltwatch. There have been a number of sort of really fun projects that they've started. So some of them might be sampling in more of a rural area with maybe more trees and things, and then comparing that to maybe a sample site location downstream, or maybe below a parking lot or below a roadway. because sometimes those samples are going to be, or a lot of times those samples are going to be higher in their chloride concentration throughout the year, not just during the winter as well. So you can do your own fun little experiment at home this winter and learn about what's happening in your backyard.
A quick question for you. So you talked about Flint, Michigan, and like the lead from the pipes. Did you say that was related to the chloride in the water kind of corroding the
Yep.
pipes? Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Water
Yeah.
itself is very corrosive. And then since they changed their source water directly to the Flint River, and it was high in chlorides from road salt being applied the winter prior, they didn't take into account how much more corrosive that water would be. And so maybe it looked fine when the water itself looked fine when it was leaving the water filtration center, the water treatment facility. But unfortunately, it was just so corrosive compared to the water that they were pumping out to residents prior. And so it just corroded all of the all of the pipes that were going into people's taps. And so that's something that I think USGS and EPA, especially the EPA, they're trying to put together a map by October 2024 of all of the remaining lead lines throughout the United States to learn a little bit more about some of that older infrastructure that really needs to be updated to keep people safe.
Mm-hmm.
I had one question, but you answered that even though most of us are Flow, we should individually upload and just list Flow as the organization. That wasn't totally clear to me last year, but that's answered. Then the other question, is Flow gonna get a package? I had ordered, got only one kit, but I plan to do multiple sites.
Abby, I have sent an email to you asking to get some kits
Okay.
definitely for Flow. So Petra, once we get those, I can absolutely get you one. And then Jenna, anyone else that you'd like to get a kit, we can make sure that happens. So.
Yep. And for those of you who have sampled with us before, we were using something called Water Reporter, and we've changed that data submission to the Clean Water Hub. And so that's why I was trying to give a little bit more information about what that data submission process looks like for this year. And if you don't associate any data points with Flow, even if you mean to, you can just send me an email and I can help you through that process or just do it on my end for you.
And we do have a spot in our Google Drive for flow and stream quality monitoring, where we have a spot for photos, just to have extra record. Last year we were using a spreadsheet, so we could keep that as like a backup in addition to everybody putting it into the app. And if anybody has trouble, then they can, input it there and we still have the data, and then we could always upload it later on or whatnot.
I noticed you said that vernal pools are highly affected. Did we monitor anything at Sawmill?
No, we didn't. I was thinking about it, but I think Sawmill wetlands doesn't have any inflow that isn't precipitation, but still I'll try it this year. Just out of curiosity. I think it doesn't have that problem because there is storm sewers all the way around on the roads, but still would be interesting to know. The other thing I've been doing last year, just out of my own curiosity, is I use the Saltwatch kits, strips, and the X sticks that we use for stream quality monitoring. And it comes up with a different number, of course, because one is conductivity, but you can still correlate them one-to-one. So I have some data that are just, curious, stupid, nerdy scientists like to play around with.
Yeah, that's a good point. So some of our partner organizations, they have been trying to do more of a comparison study between conductivity and chloride. Conductivity, obviously, measures a lot more than just chloride. Chloride's one of the components for conductivity. When you're doing those readings, though, it's really important to make sure that you're staying sort of within that individual stream, because every stream tends to have sort of different geology, which can affect the conductivity readings. And so some of our organizations, especially in Philadelphia, they've been doing something of a salt watch blitz, where they go out and they collect sometimes hundreds of samples within a day, or maybe even 30, something like that. Many samples in one sort of stream, up and down the stream, in more rural and more urban settings. And then they've been taking those samples, jarring them up in glass jars, taking them back to sort of a set location, and then doing both a handheld conductivity reading and the chloride test strip at the same time. And then they're able to actually chart out what those readings look like. And so they've been doing that event sort of in base flow waters. And so kind of in like May and October are typically the dates that they do those events. And so they're able to sort of start to make that curve for each stream of what those two readings correspond to.
I see the question in there. Does anyone here know if FACT, Friends of Alum Creek Tributaries, has done any of this? So I work in Westerville and am familiar with FACT, but I don't believe that they have volunteers regularly doing this. But yeah, the more the merrier, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm interested in looking at the Scioto tributaries, but I think I could enter that at Franklin Soil and Water, and you probably have that on your list. I guess one question, if I enter a stream and then have new data, when you first open up that page, it sort of had a code number. Is that what you call up then? Or how do you type in to find the same location? If I sample the same location 3 times, you said I don't have to re-enter, but how do I know?
Yep. Yeah, so it was a little confusing from my screen. I should have taken a better screenshot than what I did. So thank you for bringing that up. When you have created a sample site location previously, the name of that sample site location is what will come up.
Okay.
On the screen. Yep. The numbers that you were seeing were from some previous bulk uploads. And so they didn't have a very good stream name. Yep. And if you are submitting, so for instance, if Jenna were to create a bunch of site locations on Flow's org page, and you want to submit to those site locations, those will not come up as your own sample site location. So those won't come up as a site. If you go to submit a salt watch reading, you'll actually have to go, because you're not the owner of that site. Someone else has created it. And so you'll have to go to Flow's org page to submit a sample through that site. But if you're creating your own samples, if you're sort of doing your own thing, but still submitting to those different organizations, then those sites are your own. And so you can keep submitting to those. And you are more than welcome to associate different sites with multiple organizations. So if you're submitting both through Franklin Soil and Water and Flow, you can associate those sites with both organizations, and both organizations will then have that data.
Are you planning to set up sites, Jenna? Or, I mean, we should ideally we use the same names that Flow is using, like Rush A, Rush B, etc.
Yeah, that sounds great. We've made kind of a call for volunteers, and we just need to kind of organize who's doing what. And but yeah, you can make your own, I can make them. It's just we need a little bit more organization, I think.
Yeah, right. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have them double in there. And you can easily sample a lot more sites than when you do the macro sampling, because that takes a lot longer, the CQHEI. So
Right. Yeah, so maybe we'll have like I don't know if it would make sense to have like an email or something people want to sign up for one, or we could maybe organize that in a spreadsheet or something, but
Yeah, spreadsheet would be easiest and probably just through the trainers anyways. I mean, we can always take additional people, but just looking at our own logistics here.
mhm.
Yep. And on my end too, if there are multiple sites that are the same, I can combine those too on my end, if that's something that you guys run into in the future.
Yeah, hopefully we can avoid that, you know, it's extra work, so.
I can give a little bit of background on our sampling the past few years. I know that was something that Ellie and Sarah and Laura mentioned. So pretty much our sampling started in spring 2022, kind of like January time. And as far as I know, our data points in Columbus were some of the first in the city. And we actually were reached out to by WBNS News, Channel 10, and they covered a little bit of our results. So I can share that link with anybody who's interested. But most of our initial sampling was focused just on the Olentangy River. This last year, we had some of the tributaries added in. So I'd like to see us continue to expand that sampling around Columbus, like I mentioned. But it was interesting because throughout the wintertime, the Olentangy really ranged from excellent, less than 32 parts per million, all the way up to 260 parts per million, which is toxic. 230 is kind of that threshold. And so it really pointed out to me just the value of monitoring that in different time periods. So Petra, like you were asking, you know, well, I didn't get it during the snow, like, is it still worth it? And I would say yes, because it's pretty interesting to see, like, just depending how much rain we got, how much snow melt, things like that, when it would flush in. And sometimes it would even dilute. Like when we got a lot of rain, I was like, oh, it's been winter for a couple months, and we had so much rain that there's going to be a ton of runoff. And I'm expecting it to be high, but sometimes it would actually be lower just because of that dilution effect with more water. So I wonder what you think too, Abby, just about kind of addressing how much salt is in the stream, as far as like concentration, if you guys have studied anything with that, like, you know, like how wide the stream is, how much volume of water, and then equate that to how much salt is actually moving and transporting downstream.
Yeah, I know Paul Smith's college, the Adirondack Institute, they have done some studies with that. But something that we have noticed as far as trends, one, you're going to see some of those spikes during the winter time after some of those application events or winter events, whether it's thaw, runoff, things like that. But also we've been seeing a lot of spikes during the summer months and then also the fall months, especially during drought conditions, because again, that chloride is very persistent in the waterways. And so the amount of chloride is often sort of the same, but then there's less water to dilute it. And so that concentration then peaks or spikes during some of those events. And in some cases, that can be indicative of groundwater contamination as well. Not in all cases, but in some cases, that's what we're seeing, especially like in the Philadelphia region. They have really high chloride levels all year round because of that.
Interesting. Yeah, this is pointing out that we should definitely have the salt watch kits, you know, during our stream quality monitoring in the summertime. So cool. But yeah, I think that's that's kind of it. I noticed we had Ackerman A and C and Adena Ravine that have been sampled. And what was kind of apparent to me too about that national map is how in the cities we're seeing it higher. So probably just like you mentioned, due to the impervious surfaces and runoff. Oh, Petra, you're on mute.
Sorry. We also have some of the chemistry data that Nicole took. I don't know, Nicole is on the call here in a chemistry lab. I think that was a direct measurement of, hi Nicole. You're muted.
Yeah, so I did some ion chromatography measurements, so we were able to look at lots of different ions in various water samples, and for the most part, I was looking at the figure that you had showing the poor, good ranges, and for the most part, our samples were really good, except for one was in the worst category. So we're gonna, I guess, probably keep an eye on that. But yeah, so you can kind of correlate with the test strips too, which will be kind of neat.
You were talking about getting more samples with your students in the fall. Have you done that or not yet?
That is happening end of this week, early next week. So
Okay.
we're gonna try to get as many samples from the tributaries as we can, and then run those in the days following.
Are there any more questions? If not, I'll stop recording.
Thank you again for your talk.